home of a brother called Jacko. The image was of the man on the land grant offered to black peoples of the West by His Imperial Majesty Emperor Haile Selassie I. I decided then that I had to get his perspective on that trip, that journey, and also the interactions with the community in Shashamane in the 1970s. I want to say thanks to Brother Granville, a comrade, for facilitating the initial link which occurred over a year ago. Further, as a public intellectual, I recognized that the students needed more than textbooks and lectures to understand the African diaspora. They needed Jamaica. They needed to walk the grounds of emancipation struggles. They needed to engage the intellectual traditions nurtured here at the University of the West Indies. They needed to hear living voices, collective histories, visit communities, and witness firsthand how history lives beyond the pages of books. The P.J. Patterson Institute for Africa Caribbean Advocacy at the University of the West Indies has become among the most important pillars, in my view, of that vision. And through the generosity of colleagues here at Mona, our students have gained access to scholars, archives, public officials, cultural leaders, and intellectual traditions that continue to shape the Caribbean and the wider African diaspora. That partnership we are grateful for, and we give thanks to the leadership of that team. And why does this matter? I often tell my students that history is not simply just remembering the past. It's about understanding our responsibilities to the future. And for students from Baltimore, Maryland, the connections between Kingston and Baltimore may not be immediately obvious. Yet both cities have been shaped by migration, resilience, creativity, inequality, faith, and cultural innovation. Both have produced extraordinary leaders, and both remind us that the African diaspora is not merely a subject of study, it is a living reality. Our program, the study abroad, for which these students are participants, remind us of that global black experience. And both remind us that the African diaspora is not merely a subject of study, again, as I said, it's a living reality. Students engage with government leaders, academic activists. I have skipped through some things, but the result is transformative. Learning just cannot be replicated in traditional classrooms, therefore, it is within these spaces that most effective learning takes place. And so again, we give thanks for that. Today's event provides an excellent example of why this partnership matters. The text we're discussing through what has been shared previously in books and also through the initial sharing with Brother Omar, that helps us to think critically about historical, political, and cultural relationships that continue to shape Africa-Caribbean engagement in the 20th century and the 21st century. At its core, we're reminded that the relationship between Africa and the Caribbean cannot be understood solely through the lens of slavery and colonialism. Instead, it advances the argument that Africa and the Caribbean remain connected through ongoing political, economic, intellectual, and cultural exchanges that demand renewed attention and intentional cultivation. One of the major takeaways from the text is the historical memory. Historical memory alone is insufficient. Memory must be transformed into action, and we are encouraged to move beyond symbolic connections and toward meaningful partnerships that address contemporary challenges while creating opportunities for the future. Permit me just a brief reflection on that, things that connects us and the gathering with my own scholarly journey. Several years ago, I took on a research project that ultimately became my book, which is W.E.B. Du Bois, Ethiopianism and Black Internationalism. At its core, the book examines how Ethiopia occupied a unique place and space within the intellectual and political imagination of people of African ascent during the late 19th century and into the 20th centuries. For Du Bois and countless others, uh, Ethiopia represents far more than a nation state. It symbolized African sovereignty, black dignity, resistance to colonial domination, and the possibility of global black unity. So the book argues that Ethiopianism helped shape a broader tradition of black internationalism, a worldview that encouraged people of African descent, regardless of nationality, to see their struggles, their aspirations, and futures as interconnected. Du Bois understood that Baltimore, Kingston, Addis Ababa, Accra, Harlem, Johannesburg were not isolated places. Rather, they formed part of a larger story of African ascended peoples seeking freedom, self-determination, and human dignity. That insight is at the heart of the study abroad program and the students you see here. So when our students arrive from Baltimore to Kingston, they are doing much more than earning academic credits or visiting historical sites. They're participating in the very kind of transnational engagement that Du Bois envisioned. They're learning that the African diaspora is not an abstract concept discussed in classrooms. It is the living network of histories, cultures, institutions, and relationships that continue to shape the world. I often tell them that I trust them with my future because I have no choice. They're going to be the decision makers of tomorrow. So in many ways, the program reflects the mission that we proudly call the national treasure of Morgan State, or Morgan State University. For nearly 160 years, Morgan has educated students not simply to succeed professionally, but to lead globally, engage communities, and to contribute meaningfully to the advancement of people of African descent throughout the world. The Jamaica Study Abroad program then extends that tradition beyond the borders of the United States into the wider diaspora, and today specifically into Jamaica, the land I love. I'd also be remiss not to acknowledge my esteemed colleague, Professor Getachew Metafir, whose scholarship and friendship have enriched both the program and my own intellectual development. Professor Metafir was born and raised in Ethiopia and has devoted much of his distinguished academic career to the study of African politics, international relations, diplomacy, and Ethiopia's place in global affairs. He lived, experienced scholarly expertise and deep understanding of Africa's historical and contemporary challenges, and he brings an invaluable perspective to our students and faculty alike. Fortunately, I don't have to go any further on Professor Metafir because my distinguished colleague, Dr. Denise Jarrett, has that privilege and will be on shortly. So for now, I simply ask that we appreciate the significance of this moment. A Jamaican institution, an American institution, HBCU specifically, an Ethiopian scholar, Caribbean students, African diaspora scholars, and global citizens gathered together in pursuit of knowledge and understanding. And again, if Du Bois were in this room today, I suspect he would recognize this gathering as one small but meaningful expression of the global community he spent his life imagining. So, I think seems a little long, but it's my time right now. Looking beyond Jamaica, of course, historians are notorious for looking backward. But today I'd like to spend just a minute looking forward. The future of this initiative extends beyond Jamaica. We've already begun expanding our work into St. Lucia and the wider Eastern Caribbean, creating opportunities for students to explore diverse Caribbean histories while examining common themes of colonialism, emancipation, migration, cultural resistance, nation building, and this identity that is now called an African diaspora. As any good Caribbean historians know, every island tells a different story. Yet together they reveal a larger narrative about resilience, creativity, and survival. So our vision is to build a network of educational partners that connects students not only to Jamaica, but to the broader Caribbean region, and indeed to our continent. Generally, I'd get a round of applause for that, but it's okay. Now, I should also mention that one unintended consequence of this program is that students return home believing that they're experts on Jamaica, and especially Jamaican food and our language. Some become amateur jerk chicken critics. Others develop strong opinions about patties. And a surprising number have already begun speaking what they believe is patois. I have not corrected them quite yet. I'm allowing them these experiences. Ultimately, it creates lasting connections. They will return home with an appreciation, a loving of Caribbean culture, new friendships, and a broader understanding of the world. And that is education at its best. So as we look ahead, I envision a future in which this collaboration produces joint faculty research projects, student exchange opportunities, collaborative oral history opportunities and initiatives, digital humanity projects, public history programming, conferences and symposia, graduate fellowships, African and Caribbean study networks, Dr. Barnett, and perhaps one day soon, a formal UWI Morgan Center for Africa, Caribbean, and Diaspora Studies. It's possible. It's very possible. In fact, just preempting what Professor Metafir may say, my dean is fully on board for that initiative, who is a colleague of Dr. Ramsey, Professor Ramsey. In closing, representing Morgan State University, our students, faculty, and community partners, I extend sincere gratitude to the University of the West Indies, the P.J. Patterson Institute for Africa Caribbean Advocacy, and all who have contributed to making this gathering possible. May today's discussion deepen our understanding, may it strengthen our partnerships, may it inspire future collaborations, may it remind us, as the boys overstood so clearly, that the story of people of African ascent is not fragmented by oceans, islands, or national borders. It is one interconnected story, a story that we continue to write. Let us write that together. I am Ras Wayne Rose. Give thanks.
Thank you, Ras, Dr. Wayne Rose. Could I have a bit more volume on the mic? This box over here, not working. Okay. All right, thank you again, everyone. I hope you're enjoying the program so far. We are going to get a bit more serious. Dr. Denise Jarrett from the Morgan State University, the Director of Graduate Studies at the Department of English, will now introduce this evening's guest speaker, Professor Getachew Metaferia. Welcome.
Special guests, faculty, students, I am here to do our esteemed professor the honor of introducing him. But I'm going to take 30 seconds. Over 40 years ago, I was sitting up there at the back listening to Professor Edward Baugh. I'm a graduate of the English program here. I have a BA in language, literature, communications with social sciences. That's how it was in those days. So I'm here full circle, but not to toot my horn today, but to introduce someone else. Professor Getachew Metaferia was, of course, born in Ethiopia. He traveled all the way to the US for educational purposes. So he received a terminal degree from Howard University in political science, went back to Africa to Zambia in southern Africa to conduct empirical research. And that was a part of his PhD studies on civil servants, which of course is human capital development. Professor Metaferia has authored more than 40 articles, both in Amharic and English. He has published, edited 4 books. His latest edited book, published in 2025, will be the topic of this discussion this evening. The book, Ethiopia and the Judeo-Christian Tradition, Antiquity to Modernity, is unique as it examines the relationship between the Ethiopian Orthodox Christians and the Ethiopian Jews. The connection between the two has not been researched, and this book will actually be the groundbreaking academic achievement in this field. The research on the Ethiopian Jews, Better Israel, was conducted while he was teaching at Tel Aviv University in Israel as a Fulbright senior scholar. For those who are interested in works by Professor Metaferia, one is a co-edited book on the Battle of Adwa, which when Ethiopia gained a resounding victory and won against the Italian army. That victory assured Ethiopia's independence, while the rest of the continent, unfortunately, became a victim of European colonization and imperialism. His other groundbreaking book is Ethiopia and the United States, History, Diplomacy, and Analysis. The relationship between the two countries was established in 1903 under Emperor Menelik, who was the hero of the Battle of Adwa. Finally, Professor Metaferia is also a public intellectual. He has spoken at conferences, gave interviews to several media outlets, including the Voice of America, the German and Austrian radio, and the National Public Radio in Washington, D.C. I invite him to come and tell us about his wonderful works. But before that, I'm telling you that he's from Howard, so he's supposed to be a bison. But I'm introducing him today as a bear. Morganites, go. Welcome.
Dr. Ross Wayne, so I'm going to place it here. Well. Dr. Jarrett, thank you very much for that very interesting introduction. I don't think I did all of those things, but again, you said it. Dear ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for being here to listen to my presentation on the unique relationship between the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church and the Ethiopian Beta Israeli Jewish community. The background of this presentation is my recently edited book, Ethiopia and the Judeo-Christian Tradition, Antiquity to Modernity. I will hasten to thank the P.J. Patterson Institute of African and Caribbean Advocacy at the University of West Indies, Mona campus. My utmost thanks also goes to the son of Jamaica and my Morgan State University colleague, Russ Wayne Ross, for giving this summer 2025 study abroad visit and including me in this program. Also, I would like to recognize my fellow travelers, the students of Morgan State University, who are very inquisitive and eager to learn about Jamaica, who are amongst us. Please stand up and let's recognize you. Thank you, the future intellectuals. Let me talk about some historical background before I delve into my presentation today. Ethiopia adopted Christianity in the year 337 AD, or the 4th century, becoming one of the oldest Christian nations in the world. The Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church incorporates Jewish customs such as observing the Shabbat and dietary laws. Before adopting Christianity, some people in northern Ethiopia during the Aksumite civilization were Jews because of Queen Sheba's journey to Jerusalem. She converted to Judaism, and some of her followers did as well. There are 88 books in the Ethiopian Bible compared to 37 in the Western Bible. The Ethiopian Bible contains books not found in the Catholic or Protestant canons, including the books of Enoch, an apocalyptic work, the book of Jubilee, which provides more detail on creation, and 1 Maccabi, which focuses on faithful and warning against adultery. These texts were written in the ancient Ethiopic languages Ge'ez, which is in itself unique and has its own alphabets. All these unique narratives and their antiquity distinguish Ethiopian Orthodox Christianity from the rest of the Christendom. The Ethiopian Jewish, or the Beit Israeli, let me say a few words about them. Beit Israel, meaning the home of Israel, the Ethiopian Jews differ from Ashkenazi and Sephardic Jews. They participate or they practice the earliest form of Judaism, a pre-rabbinic biblical Judaism. They do not have the Talmud, the mainstream text of Judaism that includes rabbinic discussions. Instead, they follow the Torah, written law, and do not observe the post-biblical holidays such as Chanukah or Hanukkah, the 8-day celebration of the Festival of Lights, commemorating the rededication of the Holy Temple in Jerusalem. Or they don't observe Purim, celebrating the saving of the Jewish people from destruction in ancient Persia. The Dead Sea Scroll, a collection of over 900 manuscripts discovered in the year 1940 in the caves of Qumran near the Dead Sea, affirms that the practice of the Beit Israeli is identical to that of the Samaritans before the second destruction of the temple. Now, let's look up to the shared traditions and challenges both followers of these religions faced. Some in the Western world argue that the Ethiopians are not Christian enough because they also practice aspects of Judaism, such as abstention from eating pork, circumcision, and observance of the Shabbat. Similarly, Beta Israeli face skepticism from European Jews, who claim that the Beta Israeli are not Jewish enough, while racism is partly to blame. Beta Israeli practice authentic Judaism that traces back to before the destruction of the Second Temple, as mentioned above. Unlike other Jewish populations, the Beit Israel do not speak Hebrew. Instead, they speak Amharic or Tigrinya from northern Ethiopia. They also use the Ge'ez language for their liturgy and religious texts, which has its own alphabet and is shared with their neighbors in the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. Now, what do they have in common? The blending of Judaism and Christianity from antiquity to modernity. In my next presentation, I will explore the enduring relationship between the followers of the Judaism and Christianity in Ethiopia. This discussion will focus on the connections shared by these two faiths, examining how syncretic practice or blending have persisted from ancient time through to the modern era. While there is evidence of syncretism and shared traditions between Judaism and Christianity in Ethiopia, it is important to acknowledge that the relationship was not always harmonious. Exceptions abound, and at times, the interaction between the followers of the two faiths were marked by conflict and mutual suspicion. These tensions arose from differences in beliefs, practices, and primordial taboos, resulting in misunderstanding, antagonism, and conflicts. Recognizing these complexities is essential for understanding the full scope of historical and contemporary interactions between Ethiopian Jews and Christians. Some external factors tried to work to divide the followers of the two religions. By highlighting historical and contemporary examples, excuse me, I aim to demonstrate how elements of Judaism and Christianity have influenced one another. The presentation will trace these interactions, showing how traditions and beliefs have merged and evolved, resulting in unique expression of faith that reflects both religious origins and ongoing cultural developments. Ultimately, this exploration will emphasize the significance of syncretism, blending in shaping the identities and practices of communities where Judaism and Christianity interact, offering insight into their shared heritage and challenges they face throughout history. As the Zoom presentation draws to a close, attention turns to journey of Beta Israelis as they return to the promised land, Jerusalem. This momentous event not only marks the fulfillment of a spiritual longing, but also initiates a new chapter in their communal life. Upon their arrival, Beit Israeli encounters their co-religious Jewish brethren with whom they shared ancient roots, yet from whom they had long been separated by geography and tradition. The process of acceptance was complex in Israel, as Beit Israeli distinctive practice, color, race, and history set them apart from other Jewish communities. Alongside the challenges of integration in Israel, Beit Israel also faced a struggle with identity politics. They tried to assert their distinctiveness, rich culture, and pride in their long history in Ethiopia, which is also part of Ethiopia's long and celebrated history. Navigating the expectations and perceptions of their fellow Jews in Israel, they confronted questions of authenticity, belonging, and recognition. These struggles highlighted the delicate balance between preserving their unique heritage and adapting to the realities of their unfamiliar environment. Despite the difficulties, the return to Jerusalem represented both a reaffirmation of faith and a taste of communal resilience as Beit Israeli sought to define their place within the broader tapestry of the Jewish life. Thank you so much for your attention to the overview. At this point, we'll proceed to the PowerPoint presentation, which will further illustrate and elaborate to the topic of the themes presented above. Let's go back to the first one. My pointer is now working, so let's go to the first slide. Oh, it's here? Okay, I got it. I got it. Okay. This is the cover of the book, Ethiopia and the Judeo-Christian tradition, Antiquity to Modernity. The background is the hilly area of the northern part of Ethiopia. The picture shows the crack of a dawn, and around 4 o'clock sometimes 1 o'clock, both Ethiopian Orthodox Christians and the Jewish community go to church 1 o'clock in the morning, too early. So this is what they also share. Okay, thank you. That makes sense. Now, background to the book. I'm a political scientist. I don't have anything to do with religion. I was planning to write an edited book, and I approached the Beta Israelis to contribute chapters to the book that will be titled Listen to Our Stories. I want the Beta Israelis to write about their stories. How was their life in Ethiopia? On the way to Israel in 1980s and 90s, what did they face in the deserts of Sudan? I want them to narrate this. Then, once they reached the Holy Land, Jerusalem, what did they face? Which I mentioned before. You know, they were not accepted because of their color, because of their race, because of their authentic Judaism. So I did not get enough people, so I drove that idea. So I asked people to now let's look into how the Beta Israelis and the Ethiopian Orthodox Christians share, as they have lived together for centuries, what do they have in common? So that resulted in this book, which I mentioned earlier. Now, let's talk about Ethiopia. Background to the country. Its geographical location. See? You see the Red Sea, especially after the opening of the Suez Canal in 1896. That shortened the trip from Europe, circumventing South Africa, Cape of Good Hope, and going to the Orient. This is a key area, very important even in today's politics. So Ethiopia has been a crossroads of culture, history, and commerce, beginning with the Aksumite civilization in the 4th century. As you well know, there were 4 or 5 civilizations in the world: the Roman civilization, the Greek, the Russian, the Persian, today's Iran, and the Aksumite in northern Ethiopia. Now, Ethiopia is also home to the Abrahamic religions: Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. Judaism came to Ethiopia, as we mentioned before, when Queen Sheba went to test the wisdom of King Solomon, and fortunately or unfortunately, she had a son from him, and she was also converted to Judaism, and some of the people also converted to Judaism in northern Ethiopia. One thing. In the 4th century, 337 AD, King Izana of Ethiopia was converted to Christianity. Unlike other countries, Christianity did not come from below. It came from top down. So the subjects of the king basically adopted, followed the king, and peacefully it was introduced to the people. And then Islam, when the followers of Muhammad were being persecuted, he said, my followers, go to Abyssinia, Ethiopia, where there is a fair king, a righteous king who will protect you. His followers, the first country where Islam was introduced was Ethiopia, outside of Mecca and Medina. And when they came to the king, he gave them what we call now asylum, political asylum, you know? So the followers or the enemies of Muhammad came trying to get hold of them, and the king said, no, these people are under my protection. I'm not gonna send them back to the den of the lions. So Ethiopia is home to the three Abrahamic religions. Now, what is our source for all of these things? Where did you get these narrations? Well, the Bible, from the Bible, talks about this. The 14th century Ethiopian epic book, Kebra Nagast, which was written in 1314. And then is the Quran. It talks about Queen Sheba going to Israel. She was called Balkis, no? So the Quran also attests to these narrations that I talked about. And then from oral history, we gathered all of those data that we're talking about. Now, Queen Sheba, of course, she had the first son from King Solomon, Menelik I. Menelik II was the hero of the Battle of Adwa, as I mentioned before. So, conversion to Judaism became state religion. And then Christianity, of course, came, as we just said before. So the society was divided between Christianity, followers of Christianity, and followers of Judaism. Families were divided. Some adopted Christianity, some retained Judaism. So within families, there was this division. Now, because of all of this, Jewish and Christians in Ethiopia have the shared religion, the same value they have. No? They practice the same way. Judaism became in the Christian household, you know, or in Judaism in Christian household became just a tradition, no more religion. Circumcision continued, not eating pork continued. So it became part of life in Ethiopia. So, as I said before, Judaism is practiced in Christian Ethiopia. You know? So the culture is there. There's both Orthodox Christians and Jews practice Shabbat observance, dietary laws they follow, and circumcision they do. So all of this we got from the Galatians chapter 3, 17 to 18. If you look into the Bible, Matthew chapter 5, 17, talks about those things. So we got this from the Bible itself and from the Quran as well. What do this gospel say? That the prophets are to be honored and not invalidated. So the Ethiopian Orthodox didn't want to invalidate, some of the prophets that were explained in the Old Testament. So they continued because these quotes from the Bible says that the prophets are to be honored and not to be invalidated. So because of this, the Bible and they combine the Old and the New Testament. It's because of these biblical quotations we talked about. And then assimilation, one adapting another's culture and values because they live close to each other. Through intermarriages, they became one. You know, they blended. They were not seen as apart. You know? And spatial proximity, they were very close to each other. They go to the same market. When there is funeral, they go to each other, attend to each other's funeral. So all of this basically brought this together, and they were not seen as different families. They were seen as the same family. Now, Menelik I, when he was 13, he wanted to visit his father, King Solomon, and he traveled to Jerusalem and stayed there for 3 years. Now, when he turned back to Ethiopia, to Aksum, the children of the nobility of all the 12 tribes, about 12,000 of them, came following Menelik I. At the same time, they did something mischievous. In one of these followers of Menelik, some of them were very close to the covenant. So they smuggled the covenant and brought the Ark of the Covenant to Ethiopia. So Ethiopians believe that the Ark of the Covenant is in Ethiopia, which was smuggled out of Jerusalem when King Menelik returned back to Ethiopia. There is no country that claims that it has the Ark of the Covenant. Ethiopians are the only ones who claim that they do have the Ark of the Covenant. Now, Menelik I, he created this Solomonic dynasty. So the kings and emperors of Ethiopia, until 1974, until the coup d'etat that removed Emperor Haile Selassie from the throne, were called the Solomonic dynasty, the House of Solomon. So basically that shows, unlike other societies, other Christian countries and Judaic countries, there is no country that claims such history. So that makes Ethiopia very unique. Now, the discovery of the Beta Israelis. They were forgotten. These followers of Menelik, who came from Jerusalem, they were living in northern part of Ethiopia. Nobody knew about them, meaning the outside world didn't know anything about them. Now, European explorers who were trying to explore the source of the Nile, the Blue Nile, were coming to Ethiopia, and they found this Jewish community, black Jewish community. One was James Bruce, who explored the source of the Blue Nile in 1770. And then Henry Aaron, the British guy again. And then Johann Flood in 1860. They found this quote-unquote discovered Jewish community in Ethiopia. Now, the Ethiopian Jewish community was surprised. They never expected that white people were Jewish. You know? And the white people also were surprised. They never thought that black people were Jewish. To their surprise, black people in Ethiopia were Jewish, and the authentic Jewish they were. Now, those explorers, they went back to Europe and informed about this Jewish community in Ethiopia. So they formed societies, like Society for Promoting Christianity Among the Jews in London in 1859. They wanted to send missionaries to these Jewish people, to convert them to Christianity. That was their aim, not to support them as Jewish brethren. Now, Jewish societies in Paris was established. Jacques Halvis, professor of Ge'ez, we talked about. 5 minutes? Okay. So this is how basically the Beit Israelis were discovered, quote unquote, by Europeans. Now, they returned to Israel and their life in Israel. They returned to Israel because of the Cold War and all of this by Operation Moses in 1984 and Operation Solomon in 1971. Now, Beta Israelis were not recognized as Jewish when they turned back to Israel, and now they faced racism. They faced institutional racism, police brutality, police profiling, and all of this. So they were not even allowed to pay aliyah to return back to Israel, and that recognition came at a later time. Between the Beit Israelis, there is also generational differences, and then I want to mention something about identity politics. Because of police brutality and all of this, they wanted to assure their identity that they are Jewish enough, and they wanted also to identify with the black community internationally as Pan-Africanists they are. So, of course, they civil disobedience they showed, like Get Up and Stand Up Bob Marley, you know it, right? Get up, stand up for your struggle. And then Black Lives Matter, they also adopted a Black Lives Matter, which emerged in the United States. So they were building awareness among themselves, and they are struggling to be full-fledged citizens. Now, Tel Aviv University, the master program, has a special master's program that caters to the Beit Israelis only. The Orit Guardians, which study and preserve, carry on the biblical history of Ethiopian Jews. Now, the Ethiopian Jews in Israel, their population that was 90,000 about 30 years ago, they have now reached 180 through immigration and birth. And then 53% of these Beit Israelis were born in Ethiopia, and 49% born in Israel. 2% of the Israeli population they are. Concluding remarks, basically I try to show and sorry because of the timing, rushing and stuff like that. Anyway, try to show the antiquity, referring to the ancient and pre-Christian history of Ethiopia, and then the modernity refers to the contemporary situation in Ethiopia. I thank you very much. Maybe we'll talk more on the question and answer. Thank you very much.
can you join me in giving Professor Getachew Metaferia another round of applause, please? Thank you, Professor. That was a very insightful presentation. And if it was not for time constraints and such, I think most of us will listen to that presentation for another 2 hours or so, because I know a lot of Jamaicans, they love Ethiopian history, and with the connection with Rastafari and Ethiopian Emperor Haile Selassie, it's very interesting history. So I would encourage those in the audience who are interested to speak to the professor and get his... the book is not published yet. It's published. Okay. All right. So let's proceed with the program. Thank you again, Professor. Let me first of all recognize the presence of the Honorary Consul for Ethiopia to Jamaica, Judith Hilton, who is sitting right across here. Yes, we have a nice group of people from the diplomatic corps here today. Thank you for attending. Our next presenter is, well, we are going to go into the panel discussion next, so we really look forward to that. And we're going to ask Miss Whitney Wasom from the PJ Patterson Institute. She is the administrative secretary, to introduce our panelist and our esteemed moderator. Thank you kindly.
Good evening, everyone. It is my pleasure to introduce our distinguished moderator and panelists who will help us navigate the discussion this evening on Pan-African scholarship, Africa-Caribbean knowledge systems, and the enduring intellectual, cultural, and spiritual connections between Africa, the Caribbean, and the wider African diaspora. I will begin with the introduction of our moderator, Professor Rupert Lewis, who is Emeritus Professor in Political Thought in the Department of Government at the University of the West Indies, Mona campus. He is a prolific scholar who has published several works on the Marcus Garvey movement and Black radicalism, such as Walter Rodney's Intellectual and Political Thought and Marcus Garvey, Anti-Colonial Champion. At present, Professor Lewis is a member of the Jamaica National Council on Reparation and was the first research fellow at the PJ Patterson Institute for Africa-Caribbean Advocacy. Our panelists, who are Dr. Michael Barnett, a senior lecturer in the Department of Sociology, Psychology, and Social Work at the University of the West Indies, Mona campus. He specializes in the areas of critical race theory, African diaspora studies, and sociological theory. He has notably authored numerous scholarly works on Marcus Garvey, as well as matters concerning race and identity, such as the Rastafari movement, a North American and Caribbean perspective, and Rastafari in New Millennium. Dr. Barnett was bestowed a Commander of the Star of Honor of Ethiopia Medal and awarded an Ethiopian knighthood in 2017 by His Imperial Highness Prince Ermias Shale Selassie, grandson of His Imperial Majesty Haile Selassie I, and President of the Ethiopian Crown Council for his services rendered to the Ethiopian Crown Council. Dr. Barnett obtained his PhD from Florida International University, where for several years he taught as an assistant professor in sociology. Secondly, Mr. Stephen Golin, the president of the Universal Negro Improvement Association and African Communities League in Jamaica, founded by the Right Excellent Marcus Mosiah Garvey in 1914. An avid student of Garveyism, Mr. Golin chaired the Garvey Studies Department at the Heidel University College in St. Catherine and lectures on the philosophy of Marcus Garvey at various levels. He also served as chairman of the Africa-Caribbean Institute of Jamaica and the Jamaica Memory Bank. He is currently a member of the National Council on Reparations and a director on the board of the Institute of Jamaica. Mr. Golin is a graduate of Johns Hopkins University. And lastly, Dr. Marcus Goff, an attorney at law who has over 20 years of experience in several areas of law and has served as a consultant and advisor to several indigenous, tribal, and local community organizations in Jamaica and the Caribbean. He is also an advisor to several Rastafari community organizations and a founding member of and legal advisor to the Rastafari and Grassroots Ganja Association. Dr. Goff has a Bachelor's of Law from the University of the West Indies, a Master's of Law, and Doctor of Philosophy degree in Law from Queen Mary University of London. On behalf of the P.J. Patterson Institute for Africa-Caribbean Advocacy, thank you all for agreeing to participate in such an important panel discussion. We look forward to an evening of meaningful exchange and insightful discussions. Thank you.
This one?
This one and this one.
Okay, good evening, and I would like to especially thank Professor Getchou for his presentation, which was certainly very illuminating, and it reminds me of a talk that Walter Rodney gave on this university in 1968, where he discussed the history of Ethiopia and how important it was. So it's a pleasure many years later, in 2026, we are a bit freer in a black country to listen to our history. And this is very important because in 1968, it would not have been possible. I'd like to welcome again the students from Morgan State and Dr. Wayne Rose, leader of the delegation. And I'd like to point out the importance of institutional connections. The P.J. Patterson Institute for Africa-Caribbean Advocacy is an important initiative. When you look at the website, the person who holds the chair of statesman has to provide the funding for the institute, right? So please remember that this is a commitment and the culmination of a lifetime of contribution by the most honorable P.J. Patterson. There has been a tradition of initiatives at the Mona campus for the promotion of the study of Africa and for the kind of exchange that we are now having. And in the late 1960s, a Trinidadian scholar, Dr. Arthur Drayton, started the African Studies Association of the West Indies. And Asawe, as it was known, was the basis on which we developed in the Faculty of then Arts and General Studies programs on African history, and Walter Rodney was recruited to be the first historian, teacher of African history. And I pioneered the study of Africa diaspora studies in the Faculty of Social Sciences, particularly with the course on Garvey and the Garvey movement. There are a number of people who were associated with Asawe. Sir Kenneth Hall, who is here, and who is himself a distinguished historian, was a contributor to the Asawe Journal on the critiquing the apartheid movement in South Africa and calling on the cricket, the West Indies cricket boycott. People like Professor Loxley Edmondson, who went on to teach at Cornell University, Professor Orlando Patterson, and so on. Again, that program was geared to try to influence the teaching program at Mona and the teaching program on the other campuses. So the PJ Patterson Institute is an important initiative which I hope will have an impact on the teaching program. We are now in the era where the reparation movement is coming to the fore, but it will be hampered by the lack of programs in our schools which explain to our young people the basis on which the claim for reparation is being made. I want to turn to our panel here, and the presenters will go for no more than 10 minutes to allow for discussion, both the audience here and online. And they will have been introduced, and they will go in the order on the program. Dr. Michael Barnett, followed by Mr. Stephen Golding, and Dr. Marcus Goff. Dr. Barnett?
Okay, yes. Thank you, Prof. Lewis. And let me add, and it was an omission on my bio, but I want to make mention, I am also a member of the National Council of Reparations and a very ardent supporter of that cause. And we are enamored and encouraged by the fact that Ghana has joined the reparations movement. I am a firm believer in a global reparations movement where African people worldwide are united in the battle to get restitution from the European powers that have wreaked havoc upon us as African people. And I'm very glad that Prof, I want to get the pronunciation right, but I'm very glad that Prof. Gachu Metafe really mentioned the situation of the marginalization of the Beta Israel, the Ethiopian Jewish community in Israel itself. So after Operation Moses, and you never mentioned this in your presentation, but you can validate it or invalidate it. But I heard that there was a mass sterilization program aimed at the Ethiopian women to make sure that that population would not grow and surpass the, yes, in Israel. Israel, we're talking about Israel. So the racism, although they're all Jewish, is apparent. The issue of race supersedes the religious commonality. And I want people to bear this reality in mind. And that is why many of us who follow Marcus Garvey argue race first. You see, African people, for whatever reason, we are too occupied with ethnic differences, differences of language, differences of religion, but we don't look at the big picture, is that we are all marginalized and oppressed because of our race. And Marcus Garvey preached race first. And I'm really hoping that our brothers and sisters on the continent who seem to spend so much time focusing on their ethnicity, even in Ethiopia, the Tigray, the Oroma, the Amhara, are not united, right? Because the ethnicity is the overwhelming factor. And we, as African people, will suffer all over the world wherever we are, if we cannot overcome this focus on ethnicity and realize that we are first treated and suppressed on the issue of race, right? And what was Garvey's dream? At that time he was talking, it was it 100 million? What was the rough population? But he spoke to the entire population. 300 million, I believe, was the number he used constantly in his speeches, addressing black people over the globe. And his dream has yet to be realized, but he had a vision of African unity. And when we say African, we use this interchangeably with black. So if you're black, you're African. If you're African, you're black. And some of us still need to digest and relate to this, okay? And this is the meaning of Pan-Africanist thought. And I am an unapologetic Pan-African. Let me just say that right off the cuff, right? So no matter where I go, I regard myself as an African. And I have traveled to several countries on the continent. I've still yet to travel to Ethiopia, but I hope I will do in the near future. But wherever African country I go to, I make the point that I relate as an African who was not born on the continent, but Africa, the spirit of Africa was born in me. And I know that just a few generations back, my ancestors came from Africa on both sides, my mother and my father. So I am an unapologetic Pan-African, for the record, if anyone here has any doubts about that. And this is why any cause that I can join to empower black people and African people worldwide, I will be there. All right? And I'm very serious about that. So one of the things that Rastafari has brought to the table, and I'm also a proud member of the Rastafari movement, is the recognition that we are Africans. So in some cases, and Rastafari has taken root on the African continent itself, which was the place which inspired the movement, because it was the crowning of His Imperial Majesty Haile Selassie, 2nd of November 1930, that inspired the Rastafari movement that emerged in Jamaica. And in fact, we had several preachers who were inspired, notably Leonard Howe. And I'm glad to say we'll be celebrating Leonard Howe's Earth Strong, by the way, on June 14th. It was actually June 16th, which is Tuesday, but because June 14th lies on the weekend, we are very strategically celebrating it at that time. So, having said that, Rastafari are key progenitors and key exponents of Pan-Africanism. So the two are intertwined. And having, so Jamaica's contribution to the Pan-Africanist movement has come through Rastafari. So I want also people to remember that. So welcome to Jamaica, those from Morgan University, and thank you, Ras Rain Rose, who saw it fit to bring you here, the birthplace of Rastafari. And I hope you have enough time to visit some of the Rastafari mansions and places that are here in Jamaica. So what did we get from Professor Getchu Matfu's talk is Ethiopia having the distinction of having the three Abrahamic religious practices housed in one nation. I don't know if we can think of another nation that can boast that. So we have Judaism, Christianity, and Islam all housed in one nation. And they coexist together, and we should not take that for granted. So the mere fact that is occurring, my thing is let's also work on this ethnic division, Tigray, Amhara, and Oromo. I mean, so what? You're all Ethiopian. Can we somehow supersede the ethnic tension and arrive at a racial unity. That is the mission and the challenge for black people globally. When I do go to the continent, that is what I notice, the ethnic division. You know what I mean? Nigeria, the Yoruba have a problem with the Igbos, you know, and then you have the Hausa. This is problematic. Somehow we have to supersede that ethnic division. I'm talking to every African all over the planet to get to Pan-Africanism. And even here in Jamaica, we find areas in which we divide ourselves. If it's political party affiliation, who's wearing green and who's wearing orange, you know, everything you can think of, we find a way to divide ourselves. When we're under so much oppression and suppression worldwide, black people are not respected. We're the most disrespected, marginalized, suppressed race on the planet. We don't have the luxury of dealing with ethnic tension. We will have the luxury if we become a superpower on the planet. Which African nation do you know is a superpower on the planet? Right now, the Chinese are running things. People respect the Chinese. Russia is running things. The US is doing its thing, right? But Trump will not go against China. He will not think about invading China because them are run things. They are a superpower. Which African nation on this planet has that kind of authority? That is where we have to reach. That is where we have to go if we want to be a force to be reckoned with. Pan-Africanism in action. That's what I'm about, right? So let's not just be going around with our internal conflicts when we can have that luxury when we become a superpower. I'm looking for one African nation, if not the continent itself, at least Black Africa, to be a superpower. Let's have some aspirations on that. We give thanks. Blessed love.
Thank you very much. There's one question that I think is important for both the audience and the panel to focus on. And the question I have here, which has been prepared by the Institute, is when we speak about an Africa-Caribbean intellectual exchange, what does genuine exchange look like in practice rather than merely symbolic solidarity? So I'm going to ask you, each speaker, to give some thought to that question and ask the audience also to give some thought to that question, because exchange also implies forms of solidarity. So can we move on to the second panelist?
Thanks, Prof. Good evening, everyone. My name is Stephen Golding. I'm the president of the UNIA and ACL in Jamaica. We want to give thanks for the invitation to participate tonight to the P.J. Patterson Institute for Africa Caribbean Advocacy, to the organizers, Omar, to the other panelists, and certainly to the keynote speaker, the two keynote speakers. I also want to say welcome to the students and faculty, is it, from Morgan State University. I know that campus well. I spent 5 years in Baltimore while I was at Johns Hopkins University, so we did a lot of partying at Morgan State, I got to tell you that. But all right, since I only have 10 minutes, let me jump right into it and try to center it and focus on the question that Prof. Lewis just put out. Before I do that, though, I think it's important for us to understand what Pan-Africanism is, right? There have been a lot of names mentioned tonight, Du Bois, Garvey. Garvey actually never used the term Pan-Africanism. In fact, there are Garveyites who will find issue with linking Garvey to Pan-Africanism because of his personal issues between him and Du Bois. Garveyism, they more formally refer to as universal African nationalism. Garvey himself spoke about a concept of African redemption. But let's not make any mistake. If we define Pan-Africanism by Wikipedia, yeah, because that's what the kids are doing. Everything now you ask your phone, you ask the AI. Wikipedia actually has a great definition of Pan-Africanism. I'll just read a little of it. It says Pan-Africanism is a movement that aims to encourage and strengthen bonds of solidarity between Africans at home and abroad. The belief extends beyond continental Africans with a substantial support base amongst Africans in the diaspora, particularly in the Americas. Right? And it's based on the belief that unity is vital to economic, social, and political progress. It aims to unify and uplift people of African ancestry. At its core, Pan-Africanism is a belief that African people, both on the continent and in the diaspora, share not merely a common history, but a common destiny. Now, that element is important. You know, a few years ago, more than a few years ago, I think it was 2019, we were at PanaFest, Dr. Barnett and myself and others. And I gave a speech at one of the events where I said to them that, you know, Pan-Africanism is possibly the only positive thing that came out of the transatlantic trafficking in enslaved Africans. And what do I mean by that? We in the diaspora have to own it. I mean, yes, we can talk about Pan-Africanism from an intellectual perspective and talk about Du Bois or Garvey, or go back to Henry Sylvester Williams and others at the 20th century. We can go back to Edward Wilmot Blyden. We can go back to Oluwado Equiano and the Sons of Africa. But the truth is that the concept of Pan-Africanism was born out of struggle. It was born in the belly of the slave ship. And as Dr. Barnett was pointing out, some of the nuances in terms of tribal differences in Africa, it was when we were faced with the common enemy or the common disaster, the great Ma'afa, as they say in Swahili, that as Africans, we really had to look beyond our differences as between whether we were Ashanti, Igbo, Fanti, Zulu, Xhosa, Amara, Oromo. It doesn't matter. When we, in the transatlantic trafficking of enslaved Africans, and again, I'm going to use this term, during the Ma'afa, the African Holocaust, was the first time that the concept of black unity and African unity arose. So we're talking about something that came about 500 years ago. In fact, this year, 2026, is a milestone in the fact that it marks 500 years since the first slave ship left the coast of Africa with the first cargo of enslaved Africans trafficked directly from Africa to what they call the New World. That was a Portuguese ship. It left from the west coast of Africa and carried enslaved Africans to Brazil. Enslaved Africans had come over to the Americas before, but they had been brought from Europe, if you know your history, right? In that slave ship, finding that common purpose, finding a common enemy, and having to act together is the birth of Pan-Africanism. And you can follow it historically through its various milestones. Resistance. You know, going to school in Jamaica, we grew up believing that Maroons only existed in Jamaica. We never learned when I was in school in Jamaica that everywhere black people or Africans were trafficked, we resisted. Everywhere. We resisted on the continent. We resisted in the forts. We resisted on the ships. We hit the ground here resisting. So there were Maroons in Colombia, people like Bencos Biojo. There were Maroons in Brazil who built the Quilombos, what I like to call the African kingdoms of the Americas. There are a number of Maroon communities in Suriname because that was one of the islands in which Maroonage was so successful because of the terrain that you ended up having different tribes of Maroons as well, right? We can follow it from resistance, physical resistance in the field, up to, as I mentioned earlier, let's say the 18th century when we had a group like the Sons of Africa. Have you all heard of these people? Oluwado Equiano, Otoba Koguano, Ignacio Sancho. A lot of times these books are missing from our history books, but yet we mention people like Granville Sharp, William Pitt. We talk about the abolitionists. But the truth is, it was actual Africans who had been through slavery, who had liberated themselves in one form or the another, and as freed, formerly enslaved Africans, took the fight even to the British Parliament. Granville Sharp would have known nothing about this or even come on board if it wasn't Oluwado Equiano who brought to his attention the Zong massacre, where Africans were thrown overboard in an attempt to defraud the insurance company, right? And going from there up to people like Edward Wilmot Blyden. Now I have to make this point in terms of Blyden. Blyden is considered the father of Pan-Africanism because he's perhaps, and if we're talking about Pan-African scholarship, he was one of the first scholars who, though not using the term Pan-Africanism, in his writings began to speak of an African identity. Not a tribal identity, you know. Not talking about being Ashanti or a Hanti, but talking about a black identity of being Africans, whether on the continent or in the diaspora. And so we're now talking mid-19th century, right? He was from the Caribbean, descendant from Africans who had been enslaved in the Danish West Indies, right? His writings and teachings then influenced people like Henry Sylvester Williams, who in 1900, along with two others, whose names are rarely mentioned, Thomas Thompson, who was from Sierra Leone, and Alice Kinloch, who was a South African. And even before I get to this point, I should have mentioned the Ethiopian movement in the late 19th century, which really was born out of black clergy questioning the institutionalization of racism within the churches, like the Anglican Church and the Methodist Church, and began to use the Bible to justify this African identity that Edward Wilmot Blyden had written about, right? And so we get things like princes shall come out of Egypt, you know, the leopard cannot change his spots, neither the Ethiopian his skin. These things were spreading throughout the diaspora, reinforcing the concept of an African identity. Later, people like Marcus Garvey, and I think Marcus Garvey was perhaps the most skillful wielder of the concept in terms of dispersing it to the people, in terms of really creating a movement around a concept which is Pan-Africanism. So in 2019, when I spoke in Ghana, I was bigging up my chest because I went to the continent to say Pan-Africanism is our gift to the African civilization. We, the children of those Africans who were trafficked, who had to overcome that brutality, that anguish, created Pan-Africanism as a mode of survival, but which also became the vessel by which we preserved our identity as Africans, which was something that was so important to Marcus Garvey. He often spoke about the race dying out, and he didn't mean physically that we were going to be exterminated. He meant that if you look at 500 years of enslavement, of colonialism, of what he called mental slavery, we were at risk of forgetting who we are. And there's still some effects of it. Look at the way some of us wear our hair. Look at the issue of skin bleaching. Look at the language that we speak. Look at the clothes that we wear. So more than resistance, it was about the victory of retaining our African identity. And the byproduct of that, which we now see in Africa, I don't know how many of you realize that it's taken a generation or two, but the teachings of Pan-Africanism, the fruit of it, we are now seeing in Africa when we look at places like the Sahel states and others. These are Africans in the continent who have been influenced by a philosophy, by a creed that was created by Africans in the diaspora that is now allowing them to see beyond the confines of their tribal issues. Remember, we didn't know we were, we had no concept of being a unified people before we had to face a common enemy. Right, which is normal in the evolution of many societies. So again, I have to end here, but I think it's important that we own it, that we claim it, and if we're talking about the development of Pan-African scholarship, we need to lead it. Recently I put out a nursery rhyme book which takes the old British nursery rhymes and it Africanizes them. We're changing the narrative. So we're not talking about London Bridge falling down. We're talking about Timbuktu going up. We're not talking about Mary had a little lamb. We're talking about Kaldi had a little goat. The Ethiopians know the story of coffee and how it was developed, right? But the point I was making is that we have to reclaim our narrative. So Pan-African scholarship is something that we now need to take in full force to the continent, because the truth is, just as much as we're still teaching those British nursery rhymes in the Caribbean, Britain colonized parts of Africa, and they are still getting those British nursery rhymes in their school books as well. Give thanks.
Right, evening everyone. Thanks to Russ Wayne, Morgan State family. Nice to see you all here. And to our local hosts, thank you for inviting me. So I want to just pick up where Stephen left off, right? In terms of looking at the journey coming from where Dr. Barnett, and of course, following on this evening's lovely discussion, to look at how we think of issues of race today, or we think of issues of liberation today, Listening to Prof. Metaferia's presentation, it took me back like 30 years, and all of what I heard you talking about, I heard from sitting down at the feet of our elder Rastafari community members who told us about the Falashas, and Better Israel, and who told us about the racism that was being met, and the history of the Ark of the Covenant, and of Axum, and of the Caribbean gas, and all of that, that the Rastafari community has been able to pass on, So I want to give thanks to all the Rastafari matriarchs and patriarchs as well, who have been able to preserve a lot of this history for us to this time. So I'm a discussant here, so I'm going to share a few thoughts and strands, So we're talking about the vision of people and along tribes and so forth. And this happens everywhere. We have division here in Jamaica, class, same way, and race, and color, and uptown, downtown, and so forth, When I think of how, we see ourselves as intellectuals, sometimes that word grind me, And I am an intellectual property law specialist, right? But the word itself, again, has been used, particularly in the context of academia, to further divide. Along the lines of hierarchy in the structure that we have here, right? These institutions of learning are very mostly colonial. Again, we do have a history, as we do in the US, of historically black universities. What we have in the majority of where the majority of us in the West study are white colonial institutions, And so I think for the Rastafari contribution to a modern perspective is to teach us that we have to question everything we see and hear around us, because all of it, right, or almost all of it in the West is built upon white foundations of white supremacy. And we've not really taken the time to attack these things. And so when I think of intellectuals, I'm wanting to impart that we need to have activist intellectuals, right? We don't want persons who necessarily going to want to write books and then exalt on the so-called uneducated. Because we're tired of that, to be honest, And we've not achieved change at the hands of so-called intellectuals who have not been activists, right? And so I want to impart to you, young persons, that don't just settle to be an intellectual. And no disrespect to anybody here, you a campus either, but activism comes through change, of course, is influenced by writings and research, but we have to meld the two, because I find over the many, many years, moving around our communities, that we have a lot of talk and research on shelves, and we don't seek to implement it in any real way. Right? Stephen mentioned bleaching. You have these issues of bleaching, issues affecting us in terms of landlessness in Jamaica, right? Issues of hair and the hair shame. And why are we having these issues still? Because we've not been able to translate any of the teachings and learnings and slogans and the reggae songs and Rastafari chants enough into tangible activism and change on the ground, right? And so when you're doing your research and your writing, students, right, don't only look at making a degree, right? Don't only look at publishing a master's or getting a bachelor's degree. Look at the change you are trying to impact through your research, right? Look at deconstructing a lot of what you're being taught. Because honestly and truly, again, a lot of what we're being taught is white colonial perspectives on development, on identity, on our history, and on our future. And if we don't take the time, as the Rastafari have taught us, to think outside the box that we're given, right? To look outside of what you are being taught and what you read. And nowadays with AI, it's even worse. Because you go on the AI thing, and you think you know everything because you have one click and lots of details come out, but not of it, or not enough of it is geared towards how are we going to reprogram our future generations for economic, social, cultural self-determination. That's what I see it as, self-determination. Dr. Barnett mentioned again our African superpowers, right? Well, we won't get there unless we're going to have the plans, the strategies to do so, and we won't get those strategies and plans if we're still following the white man playbook. And so, for me, when I think of the modern Pan-Africanism and the question that Prof asked about what we need to do more, I would love to see us connecting intellectual research with grassroots activism more, right? To be able to support those communities who are on the front line, oftentimes, and who oftentimes feel abused by intellectuals, by university researchers and students who come and take and interview and publish, but do not support the on-the-ground real struggles, right? And so for that, I'm saying that we must break the mold, right? Because no matter how much degrees we have and letters behind our names, if you don't change the narrative and change the path to development, right, for your children and your grandchildren, you're not doing anything but self-aggrandizement. And what does that do? It perpetuates the same colonial white supremacy models, where it's about self as opposed to community. It's about what can I do? What can I gain? What can I get? How good would I look? As opposed to empowering those who we know are at the foundations of our ancestry. Right? We know the racial Holocaust, the mafia. We know it's real. Right? We're not going to get to reparations without us planning, strategizing, and cooperating in a tangible way on the ground. And so I love the whole reparation struggle, the whole Pan-African focus. I think that we're not doing enough in terms of necessarily each committee in each Caribbean country and so forth, but I think we're in the right path, we're in the right direction, again, because 30 years ago, as Prof was even saying, or even further back, right, these discussions were really not so well supported. Reparations was a bad word, right? Rastafari was, again, a pariah, and we wouldn't have been able to get international or even a regional gathering of this sort to focus on young people, advocacy and research for these areas. When I look at Black Lives Matter, what has happened with Black Lives Matter, as you mentioned, Prof, right? We see where for the first time in a long time, we're confronting these issues, these images in front of us. Why are these statues still here? Why are these names of institutions and roads and halls and buildings still here in our faces? Remind us of the ancestors who suffered at the hands of those persons who are named on these buildings, on these statues, right? Why have we not moved the momentum since Black Lives Matter into some more tangible actions, right? And I think that Black Lives Matter is a US-based thing at first, but what we saw it galvanized throughout the whole Black diaspora was invigorating, inspiring. When you see what it did in Germany, USA, the Caribbean, Europe, the continent. But again, it subsided. We're going back to the mold. Everything gone back down until the next black man gets shot at the hands of the police in the streets, right? So let's not get comfortable. Let's not get comfortable in being told that we are doing the right thing, that you are on the right path, that you are bright, that you have the answers. We need to ensure that we are putting in place now. So I didn't hear Rush Wayne Rose bio. Rush Wayne Rose is a great community activist. I look to hear these things in the bio, Rush Wayne, not true? Because they have to connect the research with the underground activism to empower and set the future right for the next set of our generations. Thank you, Prof.
Let me thank the panelists for their presentations. I want to draw your attention to an aspect that we need to consider, and that's science and technology. The Faculty of Science and Technology at this university has under construction a mural to an enslaved African who secured his freedom as a result of the action of his owner, got an education at Cambridge University, returned to Jamaica, Spanish Town, Francis Williams, mastered calculus and physics, and calculate the exact time that Halley's planet would pass over Jamaica. Also a writer of poetry. The thing about the science and technology bit is that Marcus Garvey's son, Marcus Jr., left law and went into maths and physics at this university and was part of the group of scientists in the 1980s that helped with communications technology. I want to just argue that the superpower that my colleague Michael Barnett has pointed to, the Pan-African definition that Stephen has given, pointing to its roots in that MAFA, and the activism also has to include science and technology. One of the things which has struck me when I listened to the Francis Williams story is the millions of young, talented Africans whose life was cut short by this plantation system. So it is the activism has to enter into what is it that people need to prepare in their educational system to do. And drawing also on something that I think all the panelists agree on, that indigenous knowledge systems, it's not only a question of learning what Western civilization has created, but also indigenous knowledge systems within the Caribbean, within Africa, among the black peoples of the Americas. So I just wanted to focus our attention on those aspects which goes well together with what we are very strong on. We are very strong on the area of culture and performing arts, and strong also in terms of the depth of spiritual expression. Can I open to the audience, please?
The part of Francis Williams' story that Prof. Lewis left out was the fact that after he came back here, being one of the first, if not the first black person to attend Cambridge, that one evening, and while he's running his school, everybody knows he's not an enslaved African, he got into a scuffle with a white Jamaican and defended himself because he was nobody's property. And promptly the next week, the Jamaican legislation enacted a law making it illegal for a black man to strike a white man in Jamaica. And I say that just to emphasize that I agree with science and technology and education. And there have been many obstacles we have overcome as people to get an education, only to see the evils that white supremacy and the depths that they will go to, right, to keep us down.
Okay, we're going to take, coming from this side and going across, take 3 questions or comments at a time. Proceed.
I think it's best if you use the mic, yeah.
Okay, good evening, everyone. I wanted to make a comment regarding social activism, yes, Pan-Africanism, and as Stephen had said, MAFA. What we do need to couple with social activism is the economic revolution that we are seeing amongst our people, whether it be in the Caribbean or in the States, or in the diaspora on a whole, in African diaspora on a whole. I do believe that if we pair economic development with social activism and not concentrate on ourselves, but build together when it comes to the economic development, we will actually make a move. It is essential that we look to Africa, look to our neighbors in the Caribbean, build financial juggernauts so that we can reckon with the systems that we're up against. So I want to leave that with everyone, that we do concentrate on not just the cultural and the science and technology, but the economic revolution that is in front of us.
Second question at the back.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, panel, for your insightful talks, and to our 2 keynote speakers. Thank you very much. On the point of reparations and then Pan-Africanism, growing up in what was then called East Central Kingston, I learned about reparations from Rastas, Jaloid, and Ras historian. We were little kids, but they used to say that England owes 20 million pounds. Couldn't understand what they were talking about till I went to high school. It's more than 20 million pounds. It's like 45 million pounds at the time of between 1834 and 1838. What I don't see in the reparations movement, and I'm a reparations advocate, by the way, I live in Toronto, but what I don't see in the reparation movement here, or an emphasis, is on land. We need land. Black people need land. 95% Black Jamaicans are Black people. The private sector in Jamaica is very strong. Government is also very strong in Jamaica. But we see a huge concentration of wealth in the hands of a small minority. And we don't see that wealth trickling down in any real way to the 95%. So reparations, to the lady who spoke before, not just about the returning of artifacts. It is also about learning our history, absolutely. But it's also about wealth creation and getting that wealth. You know, it's trillions at this point. So I come to Jamaica, I don't hear anything really tangible about reparations. I hear we have a reparations committee, so on and so forth, but in terms of lessons being told to people who are 8 years old, 16 years old, that's not happening at all. It's like people afraid. And, you know, last night I was thinking about the Lima massacre in 1823 during the Sam Sharp rebellion, and this happened in Adelphi in St. James. 200 men, women, and children, so-called rebels, were lined up and shot to death, murdered. That's not taught in school here. What I see in our society is that when we turn this mirror of horror and brutality and look into it, we push back the mirror. We don't even want to see it, right? So the history, the African history, or stories of slavery, we're not even learning about it. So to Professor Goff about the intellectualism up there, even people who are supposed to be disseminating that information lower down to everybody, to the handicapped man and the man who sell jelly, it's not happening. One quick point. 1792, you had 1,200 people who left Nova Scotia, black people, they were called black loyalists, and journeyed to Sierra Leone because they were tired of the racism. That was kind of like, that was the first return to Africa of children of Africa who were enslaved in North America. And they created a new society. On 15 ships, they traveled. When they got to Sierra Leone thinking, you know, the things were gonna be better, they met with the same British white supremacy. In 1800, they rebelled. And talking about Pan-Africanism, they didn't say we are Egba, or we're Jamaicans, or we're from St. Croix. Many of them were, because they were enslaved people who had fought for the British, got their freedom, and transported to Canada. When they rose up against the British in 1800 in Sierra Leone, they said, this is our land. We are Africans. And you British need to get out because we're going to rule ourselves. And you had the beginning of what is called Sierra Leone, the national state. Long story, but my brother's 1792. That happened. And in the 1840s, you had Africans from Barbados and Trinidad and Guyana who journeyed after emancipation to Africa. They chartered their own ships and they went back. So Pan-Africanism, if we want to use that term, is even older than some of the markers that we're using. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Let me just say this. Sierra Leone was also as a result of the advocacy of the Sons of Africa. Right. And Equiano, I believe, was the first commissar for the reparations thing. Don't forget, there were Maroons from the Second Maroon War who were also sent over there. And in terms of being a marker of Pan-Africanism, isn't it interesting that Blyden comes out of between Liberia and Sierra Leone, and Thomas Thompson, one of the organizers of the first Pan-African conference in London, later became mayor of Freetown. So we didn't miss it. We're on it.
I really want to thank the panelists and the lecturers for what is a very rich discussion. One comment I don't say, oh, Jamaican youth here. I don't know if it was promoted, but I have a difficulty when I hear the terminology Pan-Africanism, which we have used and I embraced, and to suggest that it came from resistance in what was called the New World negates that there was resistance in Africa throughout that period. And there are African leaders who had a wider concept. The Angolan resistance for 400 years. So there has been resistance throughout our history to European intervention. The Struggle for a Birthright, and The Betrayal of the British, written by a white woman who documented all the horrors and the atrocities. Hard to believe a white woman actually wrote it. Sets out that history of just betrayal and resistance. So there is contribution here. There is contribution from our motherland. There is synthesis in terms of information coming between. And I know the first Pan-African conference, but it started before that. What I'm amazed, as my last point, we can't talk about Pan-Africanism if we're not anti-imperialist. Many Pan-Africanists conveniently don't want to talk about the role of imperialism. At least Walter Rodney started to educate us about it. But you can't get away from it because imperialism has put back Pan-Africanism, has corrupted African leaders, have made other things happen. So conveniently, we skirt away from being anti-imperialist. Finally, maybe a good book for many people to start. There's many literature. The AU endorsed a book in 2019. Most of us would know it. The African Fact Book, Busting the Myths, endorsed by the African Union, well-researched, and it speaks to a lot of that history and busting the myths that our African brothers accepted colonialism and did not fight them from beginning to the end. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. I think I'm going to, in the interest of time, we're going to have to discontinue the discussion. We would like to thank those online also, I know, who would have questions, but we're unable to take them at this moment. This is a discussion that will continue because the exchange between, we are ignorant of each other's history. We're as ignorant of African American history as African Americans are ignorant of Caribbean history. Africans are ignorant of Caribbean history, and we are ignorant of the very rich tapestry of Africa's history. So this discussion is just beginning, and we're trying to develop the institutional framework through which we can proceed with all the questions that have been raised concerning the teaching of our history in schools, which throughout the Caribbean, not only Jamaica, the teaching of history is under serious attack. And therefore there is this disconnection between the governments and the committees on reparation and what the young people are being taught. And Dr. Goff is perfectly correct. We continue a colonial type of educational system. So all of this requires institutional change and requires the kinds of activism in and outside our institutions. I want to hand over to Professor Paulette Ramsey back to Mr. Omar Ryan. Let me just thank the panelists for stimulating contributions.
Good evening, everyone. Our time is going very fast. We will have to arrange part 2. So this has been a very meaningful and engaging event. We have been, I should say, very well informed and inspired by Professor Metaferi's well-reasoned lecture. I want to thank Dr. Wayne Rose for initiating this collaboration. It has been an amazing learning and sharing exchange on African Caribbean intellectual positions, Pan-African scholarship, and broad African Caribbean linkages. We have all learned much and expanded our knowledge of these matters. The event would not have taken place without the assistance and participation of several persons, including members of the panel, Dr. Michael Barnett, Dr. Marcus Goff, and Mr. Stephen Golding. I want to thank Professor Emeritus Rupert Lewis, who also moderated the discussion, and this is something he graciously agreed to do in the last few days. I want to encourage us all to continue to search for and uncover information, knowledge, and ideas about who we are as members of the African diaspora, about our connections to the African past, and the many ways in which our destinies as individuals and diasporic communities have been shaped by this history and heritage. I encourage all students to be inquisitive. Seek those courses that will educate you about African-centered philosophies and ideologies. Be bold about embracing your heritage, your African-derived cultural practices, and identity. At the P.J. Patterson Institute for African Caribbean Advocacy, we are committed to our mission of strengthening connections between Africa and the Caribbean and other African diasporas. We welcome partnerships that share this interest. At this point, I would like to invite Mr. Michael Hilton to make some presentations to a few persons, and I just want to quickly say, my voice is dying, which is one reason being in here in the cold has not been good for me. This is a book that we just got from Nigeria. It's a collaboration between the P.J. Patterson Institute and the Obasanjo Institute in Nigeria. The title of the book is Lest We Forget. It's a book on slavery, the slave trade, colonization, emancipation, and reparation. It's an edited book with a foreword by Mr. Patterson and the introduction by President Obasanjo. There are essays by several of us who work in the broad area of African diaspora studies, of global Africa studies. Now, we intend to launch the book in September, so I expect all of you, even the Morgan State people, you can join us on Mona, Mr. Preston's live stream. But I invite all of you to come back in September for the launch. So please don't all rush me and ask me about the book now. I can tell you very quickly that the UWI Bookshop has taken some copies ahead of the launch. So if you go there in the next couple of days, it should be there. It's an excellent book. I don't want to spend too much time talking about it, but it's a very good book. And so Michael will present our participants. Professor, if you would come forward, and Michael will make the presentation to you. If you come up here. Then Dr. Rose, quickly. Members of the panel, Dr. Goff. Dr. Barnett. Mr. Golding. And Prof, I'm sure you got a copy of the pre, right? So I don't want to think I've left anybody out. I think, is there one copy that we can give to Miss Rose? No, I don't have any more too. You were saying to you or to her as the coordinator. So we can spare just one to give to you. Anybody else who wants the book, please go down to the UE bookshop. They have copies there ahead of the September launch. Thank you very much. Omar.
Thank you very much, Prof. Ramsey. All right, we're getting towards the end of this wonderful intellectual exchange. But before we end, I'm going to ask Mr. Morris Sinclair from Ghana to make a 1-minute presentation on a program he has coming up.
Thank you. I'm Morris Sinclair. I live in Ghana right now, and in collaboration with the P.J. Patterson Institute for Africa Caribbean Advocacy, we are challenging and inviting everyone to take advantage of everything that was said tonight by all of the panelists, and this young lady who's also said something just now, for us to physically go to Ghana. Next year, we're inviting you to come to Ghana, March 2nd to the 9th. It's Ghana's 70th independence anniversary. So that is a significant milestone because they were the first sub-Saharan African country to gain independence. So if you take out your phones and put this information in very quickly, this website, it's AFRI CARICOM, AFRICARICOM, africaricom.com, and it has all of the information for you to avail yourselves of this amazing mission that's taking place next year. Thank you, Dr. Ramsey. And I will be able to give you more information when you connect with that website. So again, that is AFRICARICOM, africaricom.com. Okay, I'm here if anybody wants to ask me further questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Sinclair. All right, before we ask Princess Jeanette Rose to come up and do the vote of thanks, there are two things I want to comment on. We have in Africara, the PJ Patterson Institute for Africa Caribbean Advocacy. I'm asking you to subscribe to our YouTube channel. We have Africa Caribbean Conversations, where every month we have conversations with outstanding academicians or activists. And we have a YouTube channel where we have this recorded and saved. So I'm asking you to subscribe to our YouTube channel, and we also have a very active Instagram page. As the communications person, it is my duty to ask you to subscribe to the pages where we communicate with you on a regular. And also our website, that's in Africara, where we have a lot of updates, our newsletter, where you can see what's happening at the PJ Patterson Institute. So, an online listener, our very dear Professor Vereen Shepherd, she asked me why we never had a woman. I know that question was going to be asked. So, not that we never tried, but it just never worked. Hopefully, part 2, because I know Morgan State will be coming next year. Probably they can give us a female to participate in a discussion next year. So, without further ado, I'm going to invite a female, the daughter of Dr. Ross Rose, Princess Jeanette Rose, to come and give the vote of thanks.
All right, everybody. I know it's been a very long evening. I want to thank everyone for your attendance this evening. First and foremost, I want to say good evening. As stated, I am Jeanette Rose, the Ubuntu Coordinating Chair. Over the past year, I've had the opportunity to travel with 3 different sets of amazing students and witness the effects of this program firsthand. I am the representation of this program in practice by representing Ethiopia spiritually, Jamaica by birth, and the U.S. by nationality. Being a Rastafarian woman first and the daughter of Ras Wayne immediately after, I've had the privilege of being raised with the knowledge of seeing myself as African royalty, as we all as Africans should. My hope in continuing to bring value to this program is that these students will understand that these trips are more than just a vacation to Jamaica. All right? It is the opportunity to learn about our interconnectedness historically, culturally, and spiritually. For those that may not have caught it as yet, that is the definition of Ubuntu, the universal bond and interconnections of humanity. This is what we are here to represent and foster the growth for moving forward. From our Morgan State University Ubuntu Summer Study Abroad program, we are so grateful to the University of West Indies Mona campus for hosting us and the P.J. Patterson Institute for Africa Caribbean Advocacy for collaborating with us on this event. Thank you to the Communications and Outreach Coordinator of the P.J. Patterson Institute, Omar Ryan. Thank you to the chair. Sorry, one moment. Thank you to the chair of this discussion, Professor Rupert Lewis. Thank you to our amazing panelists, President Stephen Golding, Dr. Michael Barnett, Dr. Marcus Goff, Professor Getachew Metaferia, and Dr. Ross Wayne Rose, for continuing to teach the impact of the Afro-Caribbean diaspora globally and reminding us all, especially the youth, of the actions that can be taken to keep us not only educated and informed, but most importantly, connected through future initiatives. I would like to present a special thanks to Professor Rupert Lewis for your continued guidance and dedication to this mission. Please come up and receive your gifts. As a representative of UWI, please accept our thanks. I would also like to have Professor Ramsey join me on stage for continuing to help foster relations between our universities. Please accept our thanks. And I would, thank you. I would also like to present a thank you gift on behalf of Dr. Metachew, or Professor Getachew Metaferia. Thank you very much. All right, and this gift is going to go to Professor Goff. I was very inspired by your discussion, and I just want to thank you again for all of the work that you are putting forward and inspiring the youth, making sure that we are all connected and they understand that not only is it the work that the grassroots are putting in, but also behind the scenes, our university, our students, and the teachers are giving to the mission, okay? So thank you very much. He does have a copy of his book in here, so I will be presenting that to you. Here you go.
Thank you so much.
No problem. Thank you very much. All right, Tifa, yes. All right, thank you, everybody.
All right. Thank you very much, everyone, for being a very disciplined audience. Just one more comment to the Morgan State. If you're doing research on the Caribbean, particularly curriculum development, the Institute's website, we have a section called the Integrationist, where you can access lots of books right there. So that information is for you. I think that's the end. We have some refreshments at the next room, next door, to serve. And until next time, thank you very much. Mr. Music Man, please give us Africa Unite.